Do you ever have questions about your local government but have no idea who to ask? Honestly, sometimes we're not even sure, and we do this kind of thing for a living. But you shouldn't let that stop you from reaching out. Just call 311 or email 311@portlandoregon.gov, and they can resolve issues or help connect you with someone who can. 311 is available from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. 7 days a week, except federal holidays, but they'll get you information about your parks and rec classes, parking permits. You can even call to request ADA access or report issues in your neighborhood like campsites, graffiti, stolen bikes. Let me just put it this way. If you're wondering who to call and it's not an emergency, use 311 as your first stop. Today on CityCast Portland, we're breaking our Friday News Roundup format to honor one of Portland's most acclaimed and influential chefs, Naomi Pomeroy. Naomi passed away at age 49 last Saturday night in a tragic accidental drowning in the Willamette River. It's left our community in shock, and many wondering how her death will continue to affect Portland's food scene. The New York Times credit her with creating Portland's renegade restaurant culture and the national pop-up restaurant craze. Her appearances as both competitor and judge on shows like Iron Chef and Top Chef Masters further spread the reach of our city's culinary scene, and she has also been single-handedly attributed for making Portland an international food destination. Joining me on the show to talk through Naomi's life and legacy is former editor of Eater Portland and now editor-in-chief of Portland Monthly, Brooke Jackson-Glidden. It's Friday, July 19th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Welcome everyone to the Friday News Roundup. For any new listeners, today is a day we break down some of the biggest local stories of the week with some of the best and brightest journalists in town. And this week, we're focusing on just one headline, which is the sad and unfortunate passing of Chef Naomi Pomeroy. Brooke, thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I think the word I kept hearing the most when I reached out to people about Naomi's passing is shock.
Yeah, that absolutely resonates for me as well. I think, I was on the East Coast when I found out. It was like the first time I ever was really hit with that feeling of denial around someone's death. Like it just didn't make sense to me. She's just not someone who dies, I guess, is sort of the thing I kept telling my partner. I don't know. I just always had this image that she would be texting me about lists for the rest of her life until we're both old and retired, It just feels odd, surreal that she just suddenly is gone.
Yeah. What do you mean lists?
Oh, so Naomi, when I used to work for Eater, she often would text me if she was or wasn't on a list. And I think that, she really fought hard for her employees, and I think was very willing and able to vouch for herself and felt very proud of the work that she did. And, that did involve sort of going like, why am I not on this one? Why am I not on that list? And I used to get that from everyone to a certain extent. But Naomi had this sort of element of being like, right, but my restaurant's really good. And, she wasn't wrong. I never had a bad plate of food from Naomi Pomeroy.
Yeah. You've been deeply entrenched in our food scene for a while now. Like, how is everyone holding up?
I think this one hit a lot of people very, very hard. And I think the thing that really sort of surprised me, though maybe it shouldn't have, is that I was seeing things from chefs all around the country. Mm-hmm. This wasn't just something that really hit the Portland scene very hard. It was something that hit just the national restaurant world very hard, both because of Naomi's reputation, but also just all the work that she did for the restaurant world in terms of policymaking and advocacy. Mm-hmm. I think that a lot of people in cities around the country knew who she was and saw her as a real advocate. So everyone seemed to have a story about Naomi. Everyone had a photo of some dinner or some party or, sometime that Naomi went into their restaurant.
Another way she touched the food scene in the city is just like her kitchen, just all the people that she trained. So many amazing, talented chefs came out of that kitchen. Could you just name a few that some people might have heard of?
Absolutely. I think probably some of the most famous names that people are going to know, Gabriel Rucker. He's now the owner of Le Pigeon and Canard. Again, maybe one of the most famous chefs in Portland. There's Tommy Habits, who owns Pizza Jerk and Bunk. There's Troy McLarty, who owns Bollywood Theatre. All of these people worked with Naomi at one point or another. Even people like Lucian Prowitz, who was the CDC at Ned Ludd, another great restaurant that has since closed. So, her impact and just the network of people who knew her, who had worked with her, is so significant that people you might not think of, who might not internally connect, at some point worked under Naomi.
Yeah. I think also what seemed to grab a lot of people was the way she passed, because it was so sudden, and she was also just taking part in a summer activity that many of us have done countless of times without much thought or concern. Like, how many of us have floated down the Willamette or the Sandy, on an inner tube tied to other inner tubes? I think that also adds to it feeling almost incomprehensible that she's gone.
Yeah. And there is something very surreal about how quickly and how suddenly someone is just gone if something goes wrong in those settings. And it's such a classic, quintessential Portland activity to float down a river.
Yeah. And also, what was also shocking was how many plans she had ahead of her. She had just opened up that frozen custard shop. Is it Cornet Custard on Southeast Division? And like right next to it, she was planning to open up a new bistro in the former Woodsman Tavern location. Do you know what's going on with that?
Yeah, I think that Micah, a longtime collaborator of Naomi's, is planning on sort of carrying that torch, which I think is really special. What I have heard pretty consistently from folks this week is that if you are someone who cared about, supported Naomi, you should be going to Cornet Custard this week as soon as, I think that support would mean a lot to the people who have worked with and known Naomi probably longer than anyone active right now in the Portland restaurant world.
Yeah. Another thing I keep hearing is how much she helped create Portland's modern day food culture. Could you explain to someone who might either be new to town or just not really a foodie stylistically, like how Naomi changed Portland's food scene? Like, I know you've broken it down in the past, like that she had like 3 distinct eras, and each era kind of created like a new trope or kind of touchstone of like, well, this is what Portland's known for now.
Yeah, 100%. I think just a little bit of that backstory. Naomi grew up in Corvallis, didn't really have like this traditional like culinary schoolish background, right? Worked for a catering company through college in the summers, and essentially out of college created this catering company and dinner series with her ex. And it was kind of a pop-up before pop-ups existed. She called it Family Supper, and it was just in her house. They made like a big communal table out of doors, and people brought their own chairs. It was incredibly scrappy. And I think that pop-up series became such a phenomenon that it really helped kind of create what ended up being this incredibly influential restaurant group called Ripe. And that included places like Gotham Tavern, Clark Lewis. Is incredibly, incredibly popular and celebrated. And I think that during that period, again, it was this incredibly influential restaurant group in this period of time, kind of before the rise of these like, not chains, but restaurant groups. I think that she also was like kind of championing the supper club, this new era of supper clubs in a way that felt very fresh and new in Portland at the time. And then, I don't know, maybe shocking for some people at the time, certainly for me, it all kind of collapsed. They ended up filing for bankruptcy. All those restaurants closed. She was divorced. And suddenly Naomi was on her own. And she kind of went back to her roots. And she was hosting these dinners in her backyard with Micah Paredes, who is now running Cornet Custard, a long, long time collaborator. So she's doing these dinners in her backyard, and that becomes Beast. And Beast is even more successful than those restaurants that came before this. Beast.
Yeah, she opened that in 2007, right?
Yes. And that restaurant, it got just mountains of national praise. Again, this like supper club model with these communal tables, fine dining, at a period of time where that wasn't necessarily popular, particularly in Portland. And it was unapologetic. It was basically like you get this many courses, no substitutions, you get what you get. And it was very nose to tail before that kind of became cliche. She had this gorgeous house-made charcuterie. It was just a very bold and powerful restaurant that ended up getting her several James Beard nominations till she eventually won in 2014. And it was just, again, it was this quintessential fine dining restaurant in Portland. It defined what fine dining would look like in Portland for years. And I think this is a restaurant that also had a really, in the midst of its tenure, it had a major identity change that had a lot to do with Naomi's change and Naomi's self-reflection, which I think enters that third era at the end of Beast's tenure and into the restaurants that she would continue to run through the end of her life, where she kind of reflected on this edge she had developed. You know, in an Eater piece, she talked about how she had kind of joined the boys club to a certain extent and bought into a lot of the toxic masculinity of the restaurant world, a lot of that yelling, pan throwing kind of behavior and culture that just became completely ubiquitous within restaurants around the country, around the world. And in the midst of the Me Too movement, that initial wave, she forced herself to reflect on her behavior because I think the way she had justified it to herself was that, oh, well, men can do it, but I can't. You know, like I'm just doing what creates good food. I'm pushing people. And it forced her to kind of go, oh, that's awful. And that's not a justification. And that period of self-reflection became really evident in how she ran restaurants. She walked the walk in terms of how she continued to behave within the industry as an advocate and as a boss. Beast closed at the beginning of the pandemic, and she kind of jumped right into advocacy work. She was a huge proponent of and developer of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, which gave out those grants.
That was a federal level, right?
Yes, I was a part of the American Rescue Plan. And I think that she was one of the founding members of the Independent Restaurant Coalition, which was this sort of restaurant, I don't want to say lobbying group because that feels like, you know, big money in a negative way. This was really focused on protecting and taking care of our independent restaurants and making sure that they were taken care of in a way that was effective, right? She put a ton of energy into that kind of work. She worked on the local level as well. And when she did decide to get back into running a restaurant, she opened Ripe Cooperative, a reference to that first restaurant group, which she really focused on, again, let's make sure that people don't work excessive hours. Let's make sure that people have paid time off. Let's make sure that people have like buy-in options. You know, if it's a cooperative, let's call it a cooperative and let's behave like a cooperative. And she really was adamant about trying to eliminate elements of exploitation within the restaurant world, both in terms of her workers, but also in terms of sourcing, making sure that the products that she bought came from companies that paid their workers a living wage. It was a real turning point for her professionally. And it really modeled what it can look like to be a boss that is actively choosing to dismantle the toxicity of the restaurant world.
And she was basically creating like her new empire with this new set of ethos. And then she's taken.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we return, we're just going to read some things that people have said about Naomi since her passing. Making the right senior living choice is more than just a simple move for your parents. These are long-term care plans. You need solid information and the right person to walk you through each step of the decision-making process. And Lynn Smarges is that person. She's a trusted senior advisor and placement specialist that works tirelessly to ensure your loved ones find the best care tailored to their specific needs and preferences. From independent living and assisted living to memory care, Lynn guides you every step of the way, offering advice advice, valuable resources, and unwavering support. She researches the retirement communities which best fits your senior family member's circumstances. Not only that, she sets up the appointments to tour these communities and walks her families through each tour, advocating for them. You can rely on Lynn to offer your family the care and compassion you need during your senior living journey, because sometimes you just need that extra hand. Call in from Pacific Northwest Senior Care today at 503-830-1812 for your complimentary consultation and discover the difference a dedicated senior advocate can make.
You don't have to go away to get away. Calling all Portlanders, SCP Hotel is offering a special discount for Oregon locals, so you can save on your summer adventure today. Book with code CITYCAST for 20% off weekday stays. Explore SCP Redmond Hotel in the Oregon High Desert and enjoy next-level wellness amenities, farm-to-fork dining, proximity to natural landmarks, and an emphasis on locally sourced goods. With an ideal Central Oregon location in downtown Redmond, SCP Redmond Hotel is near Smith Rock State Park and Bend, Oregon. Guests can see for miles from their dining tables at the on-site restaurant The Rooftop, with panoramic views of the Cascade Range, including Three Sisters volcanic peaks, Mount Bachelor, and Black Butte. Book your high desert adventure at scphotel.com/Redmond today with code CITYCAST.
You know, you were discussing how many amazing chefs came out of her kitchen. I just wanted to read something real quick that one of them wrote about Naomi on Reddit. The username is XABase, and they wrote, "Naomi was my first chef in my culinary career. I started as a dishwasher, and I told her I wanted to go to culinary school, and she said, 'Don't pay for that.' She hired me as a prep cook and trained me at Beast. I worked my way up over the next 3 years. I owe that woman a lot. She was tough to work for, but I have never met anyone more dedicated to giving people the best dining experience possible. I will never stop thanking her." And I just feel like that's the kind of outpouring that I was just seeing over and over from our local food community.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I never had a plate of food that was sort of phoned in. Everything was just incredibly well executed, whether that was, frozen custard or, chawanmushi or charcuterie. I remember so many more plates of food she made me, dishes I had in 2018, than most chefs and restaurants that I visited for years. And she just had this understanding of hospitality and intimacy in the dining room that was really, really special. Every plate was, again, just exceptionally well executed. But it also arrived with this warmth and friendliness that felt very true to her cooking out of her home kitchen.
There's a lack of pretense as well, which I feel like is very Portland. That's what people state about our food scene, is that it's not pretentious. Even it might be fussy at times and annoying because you never know what's going on or how to get into a restaurant, but it's not, once you're in it, people aren't just putting on airs,
100%. I mean, I will say that, Beast was fine dining, but it didn't feel like you had to wear something fancy to be there. I think if you could pay for your meal, you were welcome there. And I think that there was never a feeling of, oh, you didn't, use the right fork or whatever. You deserve to be treated well if you were in this space.
Yeah. Something that keeps coming up, either that you're bringing it up or that I read over and over again, was her high standards. And I just wanted to read to you something that Michael Russell, Oregonian restaurant reporter and critic, wrote to him once. And it kind of reminded me a bit of, when you mentioned her texting you about lists that she was either not on or whatever. But here's what he wrote to me. "Naomi was the real deal, a force of nature, and never afraid to tell it how it is. I'll never forget the first time I spoke with her circa 2011 when she called my office landline, ! To lecture me over a review she didn't love. One of the most intense phone conversations of my life. Later, we developed more of a big sister, little brother relationship, and during the pandemic, I interviewed her a half dozen times about her advocacy work on behalf of independent restaurants. That work is over now, but it's something I imagine she would have continued for years, if not decades, had she lived." Which is, I think that's the loss that people are also seeing, is just, how much she changed not only Portland's food scene, but like the national food scene. I mean, when people think of Naomi Pomeroy, they think of Portland. Like when she was on Top Chef, Masters or whatever. I don't know if you've seen some of her interviews. She never really talks about herself. She talks about Portland. Like I was just reading and it was making me kind of like teary eyed because she's like, well, I just want to be the ambassador for Portland's culinary scene because we deserve to be on the map. And I'm just like, geez, like, ugh,
I think that was something that was really powerful about Naomi generally is that, again, like, yeah, she would fight hard to, she would call the people she needed to call. She would push back when she needed to. I don't think it came from a place of self-involvement. I think it very much came from a place of, I think, respect for the people that she worked with, for this restaurant world, this scene, for restaurant workers and, the industry. I think that she had a fierce sense of justice to a certain extent. I think that if she were here, I don't think she would ever say that she was, that she had never made a mistake. I think she was pretty quick to own mistakes. But I also think that she, again, was so doggedly in pursuit of excellence that she was willing to fight for it, especially if she felt like she had reached it, that her team had reached it, that Portland had reached it.
There was this quote where she talks about someone making a shirt that said, work harder, not smarter, and how she wanted that shirt. And there was something about that just like immediately clicked, like, oh, this is who this woman is.
Yeah. Well, so I spent a lot of time revisiting her cookbook, Taste and Technique, this week. And something that was sort of lovely to revisit in the intro of that book is how she's always kind of been like this. She learned how to make a souffle when she was 7. And she was using her mom's food stamp rations to make it because it took milk, it took eggs, it took things that you would be able to get. She was cooking when she was so young and was just so passionate about it and took so much joy in that work. It just never really went away for her.
She was also, she was a fighter and she was a worker. Like you were saying, like she didn't go to culinary school. I would say that there's a lot of chefs who, of course, also come from humble beginnings. But then there's also a lot of chefs who can afford to not get paid and do these internships. Because a lot of people don't know this, but there is like an apprenticeship where chefs work at each other's restaurants or they go off for a year and they go to Japan or whatever, but they're not getting paid. They maybe get a room, they get fed, and that's about it. And the fact that she was able to break into this club of like, nationally acclaimed fine dining, growing up on food stamps is like, just says so much about her character.
Yeah, I think that was the thing, is that determination. It didn't matter if her restaurant closed. It didn't matter if she didn't have a kitchen. It didn't matter if she didn't have chairs. She was finding a way to serve people. She was finding a way to cook for people, no matter where she was and no matter what her context was.
Mm-hmm. You also brought up something that just reminded me of the thing I read online. Her sense of justice, in a sense, not just for herself. And that's the thing, is that I hope when people are listening, it's like, she wasn't just like, hey man, I deserve this. Like she would do that for everyone around her. Some of the conversations that I heard she was having with food critics was her friends' restaurants,
right?
or people that came out of her restaurant that she's like, they're doing this, you don't get it, whatever. But this one particular person who was like, Naomi advocated for me, I want to read it to you because I couldn't understand, like, wow, that's going far and beyond. So Candice Molitor, I hope I'm saying that correct, is a travel and lifestyle content creator on Instagram. She's got like over 50K followers, and she posted a story about how Naomi connected her with legal services for free when Candice was getting harassed and stalked by a client. And she noted that it was racial in nature and that she didn't even know Naomi. They just shared a friend or like an acquaintance in common. And Naomi was like, oh no, not on my watch. Did that. And never, of course, asked for anything. They didn't even meet after. She's like, I never even like met this woman. She just, I like thanked her, but like we never even met in person. She just did this because she could. And she thought it was right. Dang, like, ugh.
Didn't surprise me for a second. Sounds very much like her.
Yeah.
It's interesting because she had this tenderness or softness to her that not everyone got to see. I mean, she definitely presented a version of it in the kitchen and when she was like serving food. But I just remember this one time that, again, we'd had some sort of like tense conversation about some story, who knows. And I went into her restaurant. I loved her restaurants, I was there
Yeah.
a lot. When Ripe Cooperative was open, she made my favorite bowl of carbonara, so I was there a lot. And she like pulled me aside. I was there with my parents. Just like, are we okay? In this way that felt like you were talking to a friend. And like,
Mm-hmm.
as a journalist, you try to have a certain level of boundaries, with sources. But there was just such a humanness to that approach that it was like, whatever conversations we have, it's coming from a place of love, even if it's tense, even if it's hard. And you could feel that undercurrent of that same energy in everything that she did and her relationships, both professional and personal.
Well, how do you see the food scene changing, because of her passing?
Yeah. I hope that she's inspired enough people in the course of her life, her short life, that we won't see a change that extends beyond this little circle of the stuff that she touched personally. I think that it's an incredible loss, but I think that a lot of people learn from her, and I think her legacy lives on.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that has brought me to tears a couple of times this week is this line from the closing announcement she wrote when Ripe Cooperative closed. She said, "I want to live in a world of small, beautiful things, but what I see out there is a big race to the middle." And I hope that that's not where we go. I hope that we continue to live in a world of small, beautiful things. I hope that people have the same dedication to creating something that is truly remarkable and special, even if it takes an annoying amount of work, even if it takes a hard conversation, even if it takes a part of yourself, doing it in a way that isn't a compromise of your health and happiness, that isn't a compromise that involves exploitation, just that love and passion and dedication for true service. I hope that lives on. Every time she closed a restaurant, it felt like a loss. And I think that you felt that loss. You felt that loss when Beast was gone, when, that was a restaurant I went to with my mother, and thinking that I could never go to Beast again was like a certain level of grief. I was interviewing these death doulas for a different piece, and they talked about how grief isn't one grief. It's a million griefs over and over and over again. And I think that there is something about there not being another one. There not being like, that consolation prize of like, okay, this one is gone, but there's going to be another one. I think that that's something that people are going to feel beyond me, beyond, anyone who's really in the scene. I think the fact that there's not going to be another Naomi Pomeroy joint that's such a loss.
Well, Brooke, thank you so much for hanging out with me this morning and talking through Naomi Pomeroy's legacy and processing some of your grief. I really appreciate you taking that time, and just wanted to send out so much love to all of Naomi's friends and families and acquaintances, coworkers, everyone she's touched, because I didn't know her and I cried. And I didn't know her just because I knew how much she meant to this city. So thank you. And thank you, Naomi.
Thank you, Naomi, wherever you are.
That's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thank you so much for listening. Our executive producer is John Atariani. Our producers this week are Julia Fiaioni, Selena C.A. Reynolds, and our Hey Portland newsletter editor is Rachel Monahan, with contributions by Natalia Aldana. Our host is me, Claudia Meza, with original music by Jenny Conley and Steven Drizos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound and All the Kimonos. We'll be back Monday morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.